All right, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Deris. Joining me is a military veteran, Latest.com senior political analyst Josh Patton, and he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People, Peter Van Buren. Well, on the heels of last week's attack in San Bernardino, Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has called for a complete ban on all Muslims entering the United States. And most of the Republican candidates came out to denounce him, as did Paul Ryan, Dick Cheney. But in an overnight Bloomberg poll, 65% of Republican voters say they support Trump's proposal. Are we seeing something of a battle for the heart of the Republican Party? And who do you think will win, Peter?
Well, demagoguery apparently never goes out of style. I am deeply upset with our country. I mean, Trump is simply surfing the building waves of racism and hate that have been part of our country really since 9/11. I mean, if you want to go back before that, certainly, but certainly towards Muslims, he is just sort of taking advantage of that. All those scared, angry people out there, he's feeding them the kind of angry crap that they seem to be accepting. He knows as well as anybody else how ridiculous his proposals are, but he keeps making them anyway because he gets FaceTime, and apparently it resonates with far too many of our fellow voters. If I were a Republican, particularly a kind of big money, mainstream kind of Republican captain of industry, I would be terrified right now about the possibility that Trump could stay in the lead, that he could pull support from the more mainstream candidates, and that he could sort of set the Republicans up as impossible to vote for anyone out from the middle towards the left of the United States. The joke about Trump being a plant by the Hillary campaign to help her win the White House. I don't think there's a conspiracy theory, but boy, if he comes into the general election, that's certainly going to be the role he plays.
Josh, none of the Republican candidates have come out to support what Trump has said, but the 2 and 3 Republicans certainly seem to support him. Do you think that Trump is going the right way here, and the Republican Party is going the wrong way, or will the Republican Party are they trying to pull people back to their senses here?
I definitely think they want to pull people back to their senses. I mean, there was no reason for the Speaker of the House to comment on the presidential election, but as sort of like pretty much the de facto standard bearer for the establishment Republican Party, he had to say something. And when it comes to the poll, I've found that whenever your polling includes people who aren't typically voters and people who aren't necessarily Republicans, Trump always does better. So what does that mean? Does it mean that he's bringing people in a kind of coalition of crazy? Because again, the one poll that just came out this week, the Monmouth University poll, had Cruz ahead of him, which there's a whole other Pandora's box of terrors within Cruz, but it shows that with Republicans, self-identified Republicans who go out and who actually vote in like state level elections, they're all not, none of them are really sticking with Trump as it gets crazier. And the other thing too, I think this has to represent, how many times we've said this, this has to represent the beginning of the end. Because once you go full fascist, where the fuck do you go next? I mean, I can't imagine what Trump could say, that isn't advocating some kind of genocide without, that would top this Muslim thing.
Well, Ted Cruz is always mocking, President McCain, President Dole, President Romney, because, they didn't really have anything to diversify from the Democratic candidates. Maybe, the argument that Donald Trump is appealing to non-traditional voters to bring them out to the polls can help him. What do you think?
Well, I go with the. Oh, I'm sorry. I go with my highly scientific poll of my elderly father and his friends in Florida, and though they have been at least 50% right in every election so far, what they these are older, angry, middle class white people, and they have been actually a fairly reliable source of how that group thinks. And what I hear from them is not dissimilar from what some of the polls are showing, and certainly what you hear from the pundits, and that is, well, of course Trump went too far. Of course we're not going to ban all Muslims, but the guy kind of has a point. We need to do something more, and it's going to be has to be something more than we've been doing. When the Democratic candidate is saying something, a version of stay the course, or trying to keep herself at least vaguely aligned with the White House, Trump's message resonates. And I think people kind of quietly nod along and say, we got to do something. San Bernardino, we can't have another one of those. And so Trump is scary to me. Just to interject one other point about how Trump is also likely scaring the underpants off of big time old school Republicans. Keep in mind that the sketched out version of this election a year ago was supposed to be Jeb Bush, a classic brainless clone who would do anything he's told to do by his big money vendors. It was supposed to be Jeb Bush way out front, positioned against Hillary. Um, Nobody saw Trump coming, and with respect to Josh, anybody who thinks they know where he's going, I think will still be surprised.
Well, just to touch on the Ted Cruz point is we were all saying that at some point the Republican Party will come back to their senses and pick an establishment guy. He's saying that the reason that they've lost all these elections is because they keep choosing establishment guys. And Josh, do you think that Donald Trump can reverse the trend by getting people who would never vote for those people to come out to the polls?
It depends again on sort of, because this is the primary. It's not just the election. General election would be a whole different thing, and that's sort of what argument Cruz is making, which is why I think it works best for Cruz, because he's a psychopath but also a senator, so he fits better than Trump does. Um, but I do think that if part of Trump's organization is going into those early states, registering those voters as Republicans so they can support him, he might win primaries. I mean, that's as Peter rightly pointed out, every time. I remember when insulting John McCain, we were like, how could Trump even think of that? I mean, that's almost it's banal at this point. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Trump can bring in the support he seems to be getting, that outsider support that is very popular. I just, I don't know if the fear thing is a consistent way to build that coalition throughout primary states, later primary states like, California, New York, PA, Ohio, places like that. Like those places tend to pick more establishment people, and that's why the primary delegates are weighted to those states.
Well, Peter, I've heard a lot of talking heads on TV say another major terrorist attack and Trump just won himself the election. Do you think that's accurate?
Certainly, that plays to his strengths. He is out there fear mongering with every syllable that he can utter, and whatever happens that plays into his strengths. I think the other thing that distances Trump from the other candidates is this whole idea that he's self-funded. One of the ways the old school Republicans, the big money people, manipulate elections and or candidates, of course, is with their money. They throw their financial support behind Rubio. Rubio can buy more ads. He gets more votes. Whatever. Trump, and may God not strike me for this, Trump has the Trump card of paying for it all himself, either as the Republican candidate or flipping off the whole thing and running as an independent. He is very much a loose cannon in this process. And I suspect, like I said, there's surprises yet to come from him.
Well, yeah, we've certainly seen the big money people lose out early on. Rick Perry had a ton of money, a ton of big money guys. Scott Walker did too. They're already out. Jeb Bush, we're seeing how he's doing. Josh, you've been
he
saying
spent 20 million.
Hmm.
I was just gonna say, Jeb Bush spent 20 million in New Hampshire like a month ago and lost 4 points for it, which that's never happened before.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a different kind of election. But you've been saying that Ted Cruz is the guy who can unseat Trump as the front runner. Why do you think it's Cruz who was voted not just by Democrats but also his own party as the least liked senator?
And I think, well, I think that's why he wants to establish himself as one of these outsider guys. He wants to get because he's the one who's most poised to get that Trump love and the Carson love too, because Cruz says audacious things, not in Trump style, of course. Trump will always beat him in style points, um, but Cruz has his own style too because he's a lawyer and he worked for as a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. I mean, he's anything but a Washington outsider, but he's able to be those things. He will read Green Eggs and Ham in a pointless filibuster to not fund Obamacare and shut down the government and seem like a hero for it. Even though all conventional wisdom says he should have lost credibility for that. So, I mean, there is something going on with the electorate that they want someone who just gets in there and fucks things up. But I do think Trump, if not now, eventually is going to finally go far enough that even people who think banning Muslims is a good idea will be like, wait, I don't want to trust him with the military or something like that. Like Trump is gonna consume his own tail at some point.
Well, all right. I
I
mean,
remain convinced. I will eat my hat on this podcast when I'm not wearing.
go ahead, Peter.
You know, remember if you go way back in history to the when Lyndon Johnson was campaigning, there was a very famous television commercial of a little girl picking petals off of a daisy. Johnson was running against Goldwater, who was sort of the Donald Trump crazy of his day. And the Johnson people had been putting out a lot of quiet propaganda that Goldwater was a nut who was going to start a nuclear war. They turned that whole election around with this television ad, a little girl picking petals off of a daisy while images of mushroom clouds went off. I suspect that Josh is right. I mean, Trump is going to keep pushing this until somebody does something like that to derail him, to say once and for all something that he's done. And I suspect what it'll be is some kind of really way out of left field personal attack on someone that the American people are still vaguely sympathetic to. I mean, with Trump, I could almost imagine, say, the widow of a terrorist who Trump just tears apart. I mean, an innocent woman whose husband became radicalized and whatever, and she's on TV crying, and Trump just tears into her and announces that she should be executed and whatever. And the people, American people, just kind of realize he's gone a bit too far. As long as he sticks to insulting a billion people at a time, as many Muslims as there are. I mean, a billion people isn't anybody. You can say anything you want about them, but if you zero it down to an individual, maybe I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that that'll be too much for the American people. Who knows? He made fun of a disabled man, and I guess that wasn't somehow enough. So I guess I have to put.
But he was a reporter. You can't ever go wrong shitting on the media.
Right. All right. So maybe if he picks on a disabled person outside of the media, that'll be enough. Or he kicks a baby down the steps. I mean, what will be enough at this point? But hopefully, theoretically,
well, he does learn, Peter. He learns because again, we were talking about John McCain. What has he said bad about any vet since? Not a thing. Yeah. He's even done stunts like recently saying to CNN, $5 million to vets, or I won't go to the next debate. And they called his bluff, and of course he's still going. But it's $5 million for the vets because he cares about the vets now. Because that one was close for him. So I think. I mean, the thing that I wonder is when it really starts to look like Trump is losing ground, if he completely flips the script and starts becoming like a sensible guy. Because again, unless I really am in a bizarro world, he has to have some kind of rational sense. Like, he has done business with people. I mean, he walked into a room at NBC and gotten hired to host one of their biggest reality shows. Like, there has to be a sensible person in there somewhere. And the thing that I worry about is that if he busts that out, people might love that, you know?
No, you're right. You're right. When you say he's learning, it's kind of scary. It's like a science fiction
it's
movie,
AI.
where the robots.
I kind of think of him as like a rogue AI that subsists off of infamy. And I think that's why he keeps getting stronger, because we just keep giving him the power he needs.
Well,
Yeah, it's like Voldemort. The more hate there is, the stronger he gets.
Right.
that's about right. Yeah, my worry is that he's actually, resonating with a lot more Americans than we think. There was a survey that came out in November that said 56% of Americans believe that Islam is not compatible with American values. And there was another similar poll, almost the exact same numbers, said that when Ben Carson was asked if a Muslim should be president, he said no. 60% of people agree with that. Are Muslims so much at odds with American values, and is Donald Trump tapping into a larger group than we think? Peter?
Well, I think the false image a lot of Americans have of Muslims certainly plays that role. Um, our country has never been particularly embracing of other religions. Keep in mind, during the 1950s and even in the early 60s, if you were Jewish, your chances of getting into an Ivy League school were diminished. There were hotels that wouldn't rent to Jews. Certainly, the other religions have always stayed comfortably in the minority category. John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president of the United States, and there was enormous fuss raised. I mean, now it's hard to believe, but I mean, there was enormous fuss raised over that. He had to actually make a speech where he said the Pope was not going to be controlling his administration in order to put people's fears. So, we have a history of this. I think the kicker here, of course, is the Jews and the Catholics were not seen as insane, violent people willing to commit suicide to blow up innocent people. And there's enough of reality that happens around that image that it just confirms all of the stereotypes that Americans have. You fan the flames, like the government does with terror warnings. Trump certainly does. It adds up in a very scary way. We've been at war with Muslims in the Middle East for what, 2 decades, 3 decades, one way or the other. The Israeli lobby has been pressing on the United States for years that the Islamist radical, whatever you want to call it, is a threat. There's lots of streams out there confirming people's fears and prejudices. I don't think Muslims as a group are dangerous or incompatible with with whatever America actually is. But I think that's certainly the message that's being sent and received by a lot of people.
Josh, do you think that America is an maybe anti-Islamic country, or do you think Islam is un-American?
Well, ironically, it feels like all religion is un-American, in that, if you are a fundamentalist and fundamentally go into the text, it says there's always something about why people who don't believe in your book are bad, to varying degrees. So in that respect, that's sort of why we're not a theocracy. Instead of coming to the New World and creating a series of united theocracies, somehow it became what it did, with a separation of government and religion and all that. So there's a problem with Islam that we actually don't get a chance to really talk about, because every time there's a terrorist attack, some guy beats up a Sikh cab driver because he doesn't understand that other people wear turbans. But there is a problem with Islam, in that it is going through the same growing pains as every religion. Islam's about 14 to 1500 years old. What was Christianity doing at that age? Having some crusades and spreading war and conquering. The question is this a growing pain that sort of religions go through, but it's just bad because some of them are at the center of geopolitical strife? I don't know. It's a very complicated and nuanced issue. But the bottom line is, as far as like it being American, of course, anything that you want to be is American. The America that should be exists as a place for people to come and kind of just do what they want and be left alone. And if that's what you want to do, then I think that that should be respected.
Well, I think the ironic part of the survey that said 56% of people believe it's incompatible is that when asked what group is the most discriminated against in the country, the group most selected was the Muslim people. So we're a very self-aware racist. But I don't think that the majority of the country relates to what Trump is saying. But there is a large, rabid fan base there, and Trump will eventually go away. These people won't. Where do these people go if, let's say, inevitably Hillary Clinton wins the presidency in a year? Peter?
Well, that's very dangerous. When you stir up a crowd, you've got a stirred up crowd. And they will do one of two things. They'll either just dissipate on their own, which I don't think is very likely, particularly if you keep feeding fuel into that fire, or they look for some place to release themselves. The Republicans Trump is at the tip of the spear, but Cruz he brings the crazy when necessary as well. These folks are being fed a diet of self-confirming hate. When Hillary gets elected president, that isn't going to go away. It's going to keep showing up in workplace violence, in disenchantment with the democratic system itself, with more and more splintering of the body politic, if you will, politics in the sense of how we live with each other. I've had a theory for a very long time, and this is again based on my elderly parents in Florida. I've had this theory for a very long time that the United States at some point will just sort of semi-formally just divide itself up. I mean, we do that to a certain extent right now. And people who want to live in a crazy African-American hating way, they'll kind of collect over here, and people of this religion over here, and this, and you already see elements of that. Go out to Idaho and preach about gun control and see how far you get. So I suspect the splintering will continue, and it's an unhealthy thing for a country that supposedly values and draws strength from diversity, when diversity actually becomes something to be worried about and feared. If I were, well, Hillary's different. I mean, she's basically running for office so that she can plunder what she can from the country. But I mean, any serious person with any commitment to civil service or service in general should be scared right now about this group of folks who are so willing to make public their hate.
Yeah, I think what's scary about what you just said is you mentioned Ted Cruz can also bring the hate. I don't know any Republican candidate that can't bring the crazy when called upon. I mean, even the establishment guys, Rubio's out there talking about how God's law trumps the Supreme Court's law, and Jeb Bush has a tax plan that'll cost 4 times as much as his brother's catastrophic tax plan did. There's plenty of crazy there, and it's scary that Donald Trump is making them look sane. But as far as the people that are supporting him, Josh, there was an article in Vox today that said that Trumpism would be an ideal third party, given that they're just as anti-Republican right now as they are anti-democratic. Do you think that the angry, xenophobic, racist people will kind of splinter off from the Republican Party that for the past 2 days has denounced Trump's very popular Muslim ban?
Well, I mean, one can only hope. And I say that because, again, the Republican Party is in serious trouble. If Trump somehow wins the nomination, I still have enough faith in Americans and society in general that he would not win. I think it would be a resounding landslide for whatever Democrat. I mean, I think a coat rack with a hat on it would probably win over Donald Trump in a general election. Um, so I think that the best thing to do would be if Trump were to create like some kind of third party and then just purge the Republicans of this element. Because whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, liberal or conservative, no one side is going to get it right all the time. You need a rational opposition party to, you know, push up against these ideas and make sure that it is good governance. And that's something we don't have now. We haven't had that for arguably since the Democrats took the House in '06.
Well, I think it's pretty rare that you have a two-party system in a developed world country, right? And in Europe, you're seeing a lot of the National Front in France, UKIP in the UK. They're rising basically on a platform of just straight up anti-immigrant, anti-minority, anti-Muslim, just forget economy, forget all that. This is going to fix everything. Just get rid of the minorities. Do you think that if Trump, let's say he loses the nomination and then runs as a third party, which he's threatened to do again this week, do you think that then could birth that sort of movement here in the U.S., Peter?
Well, I think the key difference is the European countries are parliamentary systems. So there's a lot more room for a lot of smaller thought groups who can find their own place and bring their influence into the system, and at the same time not really dominate thinking. In America, we have roughly two winner takes all type contests, right? I mean, one party gets the White House and the other party snatches up the Senate and maybe the House separately. But you do have this sort of sense that if you have any outliers, they have to be absorbed into the group. I like Josh's concept that Trump could, in fact, purge the Republican Party of its. We've talked about this before, that during the primary season, Republican candidates have to say kind of these crazy over the top things, particularly when they get into states where the majority of Republican voters seem to welcome crazy over the top things. And then they have to sort of pull it back and kind of pretend they didn't say it during the general election. If Trump can take these people out of the Republican Party and scatter them around a failed independent party run, that is actually a good thing. That holds open the possibility of what our two-party system was supposed to do, and that is to create, a loyal opposition, if you will, that will keep the party in power honest, will keep the debate open and moving, and all the good things like that. But if Trump fails to take them with him, you're looking at potentially a huge alienation within the Republican Party. A lot of it's, I think you'll see this, for example, with Democrats this time. There's a lot of Democrats who aren't fond of Hillary, but certainly would never vote Republican. They'll just stay home. And at that point, you're getting a smaller and smaller group of people who are making some of the most important decisions that we can about who's going to lead us. And in that sense, once again, I keep coming back to being afraid and fearful. That is another thing that Trump could do that would terrify me, is lower the participation, which is already crappy in the United States anyway, lower participation even further.
What do you think, Josh? Do you think we can have another splinter group similar to UKIP or the National Front?
I mean, I definitely think that it's there, but I think that, every year that we keep going, it gets smaller and smaller. I mean, that's a gut feeling. I don't have any sort of data to back that up. One of the things that Peter was talking about, I think, well, it made me think of something sort of, the part of what you're saying is because there aren't really leaders in the parties right now. I mean, and I hate the storybook bullshit of politics, the idea of like the party coming together behind this person with great ideas and all that. But we kind of need someone to at least aspire to that. People are the GOP candidates are running for AM talk radio host in chief. They don't want. It's not about governance. It's about looking conservative and thumping your chest and all that. And for some people, especially in times that are trying, they might respond to someone with a message of optimism, but since there isn't anyone with a fucking message of optimism, what else are they going to do? I think that if we want to continue being a progressive society, and by progressive I mean just sort of progressing and evolving in a way that is better, we definitely we will need elected officials who are looking past the next fundraising call, the next midterm. I mean, the campaign, the constant campaign, pretty much, I think, with Bush 43, maybe even Clinton. I'm not really 100% sure on that, but it's all about campaigning now and not about governing. And until it becomes that, and until there are people who are talking about what's good for the country, not what's good for the party, people will gravitate to those more extreme messages just because they sound like solutions.
Well, we talk about the campaign, like the end byproduct is the election and a new president, but the campaign and the rhetoric is its own thing, and people are watching it. And this is one of the most watched races ever around the world, I would think. Isn't the rhetoric that we're hearing right now just causing irreparable damage in the relations between us and them? The way that it's been put to us, the Muslim world and America. He is speaking to the rest of the world as a representative of the U.S. Peter?
Yeah, today's central theme of how frightened I am of Donald Trump. You added one more layer to it. People pay a lot of attention. One of the things that always struck me when I traveled abroad was how informed people were about things in the United States. Americans' ignorance is kind of a standing joke throughout the world, but even people who kind of imagine themselves, Americans who kind of imagine themselves generally well informed, tended to be less informed than a lot of foreigners that I met. And particularly, they watch very closely things like the presidential race, because America controls in large part the world economy. Foreigners and foreign countries have extraordinary amounts of money in our stock market and our treasury bonds and things, and watch that very carefully. And they know that America is a big, clumsy giant when it comes to military adventures, and they watch that very closely as well. So, yeah, what these people say affects everything. It affects what we do here at home, but I think people like Trump are nearly wholly ignorant of the fact that their words reach beyond our shores, and that if he were to become president, he's going to have to take some level of responsibility for the effect of those words.
Josh, how terrifying is it that Donald Trump is speaking to the world right now as a representative of, us?
It's not as terrifying as it will be if he wins, because I think it will send a strong message if eventually, Trump's saying all this stuff, but, if he comes in fourth in the Iowa caucus, that'll send, I think, an even sort of stronger message that maybe the polls and, folks like us either can't accurately convey or don't know about, or maybe even don't want to convey until after the election. Like, how great would it be if it was this tense and then it just goes the way it's supposed to, and we have like Rubio, Cruz, Bush, Trump. Like, if that's Iowa, everything's fine. It was like an anomaly, nothing to see here. Let's get back to thinking like we know what we're talking about.
Well, we are talking about, multiple months of this is what the Muslim world hears from America. Whenever they're mentioned, it's let's ban them, let's ban the refugees, let's bomb their families, the families of ISIS.
It's awful. Oh yeah, I mean, they don't even have to lie in their recruitment videos. They can just play the clips and translate it accurately. At least 10, 15 years ago, they had to lie in the videos
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that, not having a respected leader, and for that you need a loyal opposition who, like McCain said in the classic 2008 clip where the lady's like, I can't trust Obama, he's an Arab, and he's like, no, man, just no, give me the mic. And he said he was a good American, he just disagrees with him, he's a good family man. That's what America needs now, and we're not getting it. We're getting Obama is the greatest national security threat to the United States from a former Speaker of the House. It's crazy. It is actually crazy. So, that's why we would need someone like a grown up to speak to those issues. And until we have that, yeah, it does. It really looks bad. I mean, to be fair, at least the rest of the world respects Obama because he is the president. Like, he still gets that. Like, he's still the president of America, regardless of what other people say about him. So I would think in the way that I know people consider the way the government works, they think the president is the king in a sort of in effect, and so I don't think it's hurting us that way. But if Trump says ban all Muslims and then wins, ISIS will have a great day.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, Peter, you're talking about 1.5 billion people, and even if just a handful of them hear what Trump is saying and just assume, well, that's the way they feel about me, isn't Trump going to cause more anti-American sentiment than ISIS could?
Well, sure. I mean, this
I guess
this
what I'm
goes to
saying is,
saying
can
that
we bomb Trump instead?
there you go. I think that would kind of resolve a lot. We wouldn't have as much to talk about here, but I think it would resolve a lot of things. I mean, as Josh was saying, at this point, ISIS has the interns putting together their video propaganda. It's a no-brainer for them, and these things are lasting. I think the same way my father and his friends say, well, Trump's gone too far. Of course, we're not going to ban all Muslims, but the guy does have a point. I think among the world's Muslims, it kind of works the same way. The more intelligent folks certainly understand Trump is way over the top, but at the same time, they may say to themselves, "Yeah, Trump is just the big loud voice," but I think he may be speaking at a certain level for what a lot of Americans feel. The United States, in our policies, we certainly don't ban Muslims, but we have sent some very strong messages. Most of the so-called bad Muslim countries, and even some of the good ones like Malaysia, people from those countries face additional processing before they can come to the United States. They're denied the privileges of the visa waiver, the visa-free program to come to the United States. We just recently put into play a new policy where anyone, including people from the visa waiver countries, who has visited Iraq, Syria, or, quote, places of Muslim radicalization or something like that, the wording, are going to need visas now and extra screening. So while we're not banning Muslims, we certainly are sending some messages that are consistent with what Trump is saying. And people overseas know that, and I think they listen carefully to what people like Trump say, because it is not at variance with what is really happening around them already.
But I think one thing you're missing too, Peter, in sort of that reading of things is the way it's presented in the media, specifically broadcast media, because even if with the best of intentions, just trying to maintain some illusion of objectivity, people will discuss this like it's a shocking but valid policy decision. Like Trump says he should ban all Muslims. Is that awful? And some people are like, yes, it's awful. Well, no, it's not that awful. So I don't think there's nuance to it. I think that the Muslim community in America is probably more aware than ever of sort of the growing, the Trump stuff is just the icing on the cake. Like, that's just sort of the buildup. That's where it's going. I think that there needs to be a sort of a gut check by people in entertaining these Trump suggestions and trying to maintain objectivity. Like there was a headline, I don't remember where I saw it today, but it was that some editor was being called out for saying that it was perfectly within, news standards to identify Donald Trump as mendacious racist to Donald Trump. And, you don't want to take a sign of when it's not really a sensible thing. You have to be able to say this shit is nonsense, which I think the Republicans kind of gave the news agents, the power to do with Paul Ryan coming out, and like, no matter how you wanted to present the story, there was a right-wing voice saying Trump was wrong. But the media doesn't care. Like, they want the controversy too. So it's, if you're thinking about how it's going to respond to like how this is going to feel to like Muslim Americans, it feels like the whole country hates them.
Yeah, no, it's a valid point. I mean, I don't know when all the journalism schools in the United States actually did shut down, but the concept of objectivism has really devolved into this idea that one person says green and the other person says red. It's like, here's Elie Wiesel discussing the Holocaust, and now for a dissenting opinion, Martin Bormann. This counts as objectivity. I watched the president's speech this week about how we don't need to worry about gun control because San Bernardino was all terrorists. We know what to do. But following that, CNN simply had a bunch of people who screeched, "He's right, he's wrong, he's right, he's wrong," and among other things,
NPR did that. I was driving during the speech. I had to take my daughter home, and I was driving back listening to it on NPR. And you'd think NPR would just have people talking calmly in their NPR voice. Nope, it was, he's right, he's wrong, he's right. Oh, here's someone from the, angry Muslim thing. How dare he say the Muslim community need to condemn thing? Here's someone from the angry, how dare he say we need to be nice to Muslims? Like, that was NPR. I mean, I don't understand why. America, get your shit together, Just come on. Like, can we please do that? It's not humorous anymore.
That
was a tepid speech, but it wasn't. It was a tepid speech. It evoked no sort of emotion because it was things people should have known already without him having to interrupt primetime Sunday TV to tell us this.
Yeah. That's right.
And of course,
I mean, as an example of the function of journalism or lack thereof of his speech, first of all, he made an absolute factual error in saying that the woman who was the shooter, the female shooter, came to the United States on the visa waiver program. That's factually wrong. She came with a visa, and you gotta, parenthetically, you have to wonder how multiple drafts of a presidential speech somebody misses a one like that. But no one called him out.
They fixed it on the official transcript. If you go back to the transcript, they edited it, which I don't know. I didn't know you could do that. I thought a transcript was what was said.
Whatever. Down the memory hole. But the other thing, for example, that is missing from the media's discussion of that speech and the discussion of ISIS in general, for example, is the role of Saudi Arabia in all this. I don't want to take us off topic, but using it as an example of where the media just doesn't pay any attention at all and doesn't really care. Obama wants to get some kind of UN conference together to discuss how to choke off terrorist funding. Well, yeah, but that's all going to happen.
The only person involved is Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, take a look at this. I mean, the San Bernardino, the shooter came from Pakistan, so we're bombing Syria. It's these kind of things that nobody in the media wants to talk about. Today, for example, the Turks were bombing the Kurds in Iraq. And yet the United States media kind of brushes that all off and imagines that the Turks and the Kurds and the Iraqis are all our allies in the fight against ISIS. There's no sense of this. part of it is unfortunately the utter lack of brain power on the part of most journalists. They're only interested in a story as opposed to the story. Um, when I was in Iraq and charged before I became radicalized, one of my jobs was to take journalists out to see the ridiculous bullshit that we were paying for in Iraq, the bridges and schools and whatever. And I never really had much experience with this in the State Department, and I was shocked at how easy it was. I didn't really have to work hard at all. I would just say, before this road was built, I don't know, little kids could not go to school. And so they stayed home. But once we built this road, children could go to school, and families sent their daughters to school for the very first time. Victory is ours. And people just said, oh, okay. And it wasn't
a State Department official told us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was utterly easy, and those experiences. I don't know. I mean, we've all probably had some experience where we have been a participant in an event that was later reported on by the media, and in most of my experience, what was reported and what really happened are significantly at variance. Present company accepted. I really don't have a lot of faith in the role that the media was envisioned and once perhaps did play.
Just to bring us back on track, I love that the
I'm
Trump
sorry,
conversation
I got off on a rant
completely
there.
went into. No, I was going to go right into the San Bernardino thing. I thought what was interesting about the huge overreaction to let's ban all Muslims, it's all the Muslims, was that, the terrorists used guns, and there was calls for don't overreact, don't you dare overreact or politicize this tragedy. The parents of Saeed Farouk were placed on a terror watch list after the attack, which means they could still go and stock up on AR-15s. What the fuck's the point of a watch list? I'm sorry, there was a whole bunch of other stuff I had written down, and it just annoys me so much. And the people that talk about the terrorist watch list, the people that talk about the terrorist watch list, that talk about there's no due process and there's thousands of people wrongly placed on the list. At the same time, there are roughly 800 something thousand people that are not wrongly placed on the list. These people can still go out and use the same exact weapons that the San Bernardino shooters got. Why don't we overreact in this way to something we can actually affect instead of talking about some crap like let's ban the 1.5 billion people out of whom a few might be terrorists?
Well, I actually happen to be one of those people who really think that the terrorist watch list thing is a bad idea. And not just, again, not a bad idea in practice. Yes, of course, you don't want guns in the hands of people who might cause trouble. That, I'm actually, it's fine. But the thing is due process is important, and especially with something that has been determined by the Supreme Court to be a constitutional right. So I think that just sets a very dangerous precedent to start denying constitutional rights for being on the terror watch list, because if you can deny the Second Amendment, you can just as easily deny the Fourth and the 14th and things like that. So I think in spirit, like, how about this? Put in the NCIS if they're on the terror watch list, and then let that be a flag. Like, make it so that that is part of the background check. There are people who are accused of domestic abuse who can't buy guns, and as long as they're not convicted, that right is restored to them. So, again, it's just the plan that they have out there now sucks. But because we can't have, again, any rational debate about gun control or any kind of gun law whatsoever, that can't be discussed. Like, let's just make it part of part of the due process, and then it's fine. So I just think that sort of part your point about the reaction to the San Bernardino shooting. It was the first time I've ever actually been legitimately fully ashamed of my country, like it just in general. Because to be fair, on Twitter, I saw gun control politicizing, pro-gun control politicizing, well before I saw anti-gun control stuff, just because, naturally people are passionate and it's an emotional thing. But I mean, we were already at each other's throats before the event. Not only was before it was even over, before we even knew what it was.
Well, to be
So,
fair, that's
you know,
also because
that
you
would
were
have been
still
like,
talking about the Planned Parenthood shooting just days before that, and
that
the
is
mass shooting
100%
just
true.
days
This was
before
4
that. We were
days
already
after.
talking about this, and then this attack
Which
walked into that
also
conversation.
They're way more related than we've given it credit for, because they're both acts of religious fundamentalist terrorism. They were literally the same fucking thing there. But neither, to get back to the other thing, is on terrorist watch list,
Well,
because he didn't have a bin Azir in his name.
well,
You know, it's interesting that the Planned Parenthood shooting just freaking disappeared.
Oh, it did vanish. Yeah, no one gives a shit anymore.
It just went away. I mean, the San Bernardino thing, it just took it and made it go like it never happened. It was incredible how quickly it disappeared from the media.
At the risk of repeating myself, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if we even actually talked about Planned Parenthood in extent last time, because fucking San Bernardino was going on as we were talking about it. But the one thing that I found, and again, through a completely unscientific, I talked to the pro-life and anti-abortion people that I know, no one for the Planned Parenthood shooting would say that what he did was a worse crime than abortion, morally. At best, you were going to get their equally morally wrong. So I think that's why that went away, just because unless you're going to talk only about that particularly disturbing point, there's really nothing more to say about it. And, you know, Islamic terrorism, that's a dance they know how to do for days.
Yeah.
But
this
is like, but this would be like if fucking if it was like 2003, 2004 pundit clashes on September 12th, the way we reacted to San Bernardino. You know, I honestly think that if it had been worse, or like a bigger scale thing, if they had pulled off 1 or 2 attacks like in Paris, man, I don't know if we could even fucking take it. And I don't know what would happen. But I think that is sort of the problem, is that the things that should bring us together, like the aftermath of terror attacks, just makes us further divided, which that's the scary part.
Can you imagine I mean, there were 14 people killed in San Bernardino, and you know, my condolences to the families. But I mean, imagine what our country would be doing if there was something on a larger scale, a half of a third of a 9/11, whatever. I mean, something
Right.
that really involved the kind of terrorism that we sort of almost seem to be waiting for, I guess. It would just destroy us. I think the thing, though, coming out of San Bernardino on a minor scale that emphasizes our full of shittedness is how almost instantly the discussion turned from guns to the safe ground, the go-to of anti-Muslim terrorist stuff. I mean, Obama's speech didn't have a word about gun control that I could pick up. I mean,
no, he did
right
mention what
after
I
the
mentioned
shooting,
about the watch list.
Well, he mentioned
yeah, you know, a taste of it. But I mean, the thrust of the speech was, now we got to go fight ISIS harder. You know, it just completely turned it around, and we got back to safe ground here. Same way with Planned Parenthood. I suspect if people were going to ever revive the discussion about that, we would scrupulously avoid abortion, and we would talk about crazy people and the mentally ill getting guns at worst, at best, whatever you want to say. We seem to sidestep what matters in favor of what's easy to have our media discussions about, except here on Latest.com.
All right. I want to close out. Today, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was announced as Times Person of the Year for her leadership in the European refugee crisis, the Greek financial crisis. She beat out Donald Trump and ISIS leader Abu al-Baghdadi, which I think that those two should be mentioned in the same sentence more often. Would you guys have picked Merkel as your top choice for Person of the Year, Josh?
No. No, I don't. And honestly, here's the thing. Here's why you can't name Trump Person of the Year, but he's obviously Person of the Year. Like, Person of the Year is supposed to be just the most, like, the person who just affected everything the most in a year. At least from what I understand, I don't quite know the rules. But
Can I just say,
you can't name Trump Person
based
of the
on that
Year.
criteria, I would actually go with the ISIS guy. No one's fucked up the world
I
more
mean,
than him.
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And I hadn't even actually considered him, but yeah. It should have been, but it should have been one of those two. But obviously, it couldn't have been. I think that's why they phrased it that way, because she's at least a nice lady trying her best to run a country, and But again, Trump here at least definitely because of just the way that he has made everything so uncertain, but I don't know, you're right, Igor. Baghdadi fucked up the world, and just by making some videos and killing a few thousand people.
Probably wouldn't be a good idea for to help the ISIS propaganda machine by putting him on the front page. But I mean, a second place finish isn't bad either. Peter, who would your Person of the Year be?
Well, I'll start off by saying, what the hell did Merkel do? I mean, this year, I don't even know what. I mean, seriously, how did she even get on the list?
I'll
Certainly
be honest, I have no idea either. I was going to Google it and be like, well, obviously, Peter, because
Bernie Sanders, by the way, won the online readers poll.
Certainly, by the arbitrary criteria we've just established here, I mean, Trump is a headliner. Baghdadi is a headliner. I'd probably go with Putin myself, only because of he's influenced a lot of things.
Yeah.
And he's got longevity. We've sketched out scenarios where Trump could just kind of crawl back under the swamp-covered shithole rock that he lives under. Al-Baghdadi is largely symbolic of something that we've probably willed into being in the United States and exaggerated things. But Putin is there. He's been there. He's going to be there. He swings a much bigger stick than ISIS ever will. So if it wasn't Merkel, because you're right, what a wonderful, nice old lady.
I gotta say, we kind of owe Romney an apology. He said Putin was dangerous, and we were like, "Shut up, stupid."
We're sorry.
He kind of nailed that one.
All right.
I think was the technical answer, but
my choice would have been the guy who created that Twitter poll of whether you would kill baby Hitler or not, because we're still talking about it.
It's true.
So with that,
Pizza Rat. Pizza Rat
is the Person of the Year.
Or you're not a Muslim bra from the London terrorist attack in the metro.
He's good.
He's
or
good.
That woman we keep writing about in Brazil who keeps getting the butt enlargement surgery.
I really think they should put us in charge of this Time magazine list. With that, we're going to go send our resumes to Time. Thank you guys for joining us. Tune in next week. Keep reading Latest.com.